Hi everyone, today we're diving into a topic that affects us all, even if it doesn't feel obvious. The fight to preserve endangered languages and why linguistic diversity matters. So let's talk about what's happening, why it's happening, and why it's crucial for humanity to care. Well, first things first, all languages are equal, every single one. That's a core belief of the Endangered Language Alliance, an inspiring group of linguists, activists, polyglots, and everyday people working to document endangered languages and celebrate linguistic diversity. Language isn't just about words, it's about how we see the world, how we live, and how we connect. So no language is inherently better than another. Some might specialize in describing the natural world, others in abstract concepts, but every language is a fully developed system, no matter how few people speak it or whether it's written down. What makes one language seem superior isn't its structure, it's often the social or political power of its speakers. Now, here's the alarming part. Almost half of the world's 7,000 languages are at risk of disappearing. And we're not just talking about small-scale losses. Hundreds of languages have fewer than 10 speakers left, and many of those speakers are elderly. This isn't a natural process. It's happening because of colonization, globalization, and the dominance of a few killer languages like English, Spanish, and Mandarin. Languages don't die naturally, they're forced out. People are pressured, directly or indirectly, to abandon their mother tongues in favor of dominant languages. This shift happens because people believe, and often rightly so, that speaking a dominant language gives them better access to jobs, education, and social acceptance. But here's a catch. When a language vanishes, it takes with it a wealth of knowledge, culture, and history that no dominant language can ever replace. So, why does it matter if we lose a language? Well, let's break it down. First of all, knowledge and insight. Each language holds unique knowledge. Without the Khoisan languages of Southern Africa, for instance, we wouldn't know how clicks can be used so effectively in speech. Without Warao, we wouldn't see how object-subject-verb ordering works as a grammatical norm in those type of languages. And without the tones of Hmong-Mien languages, we'd miss out on how rich tonal systems can be. Number 2, cultural treasures. Languages can carry more than words. They're filled with oral histories, proverbs, poetry, and humor that rarely translate well. When a language disappears, much of this cultural richness is lost forever. Number 3, well-being. Research shows that maintaining a mother tongue has significant mental and physical health benefits, especially for marginalized communities. Language connects people to their identity and their past, and losing it can leave communities feeling disconnected. Number 4, human diversity. Language is a testament to human creativity and adaptability. It's a reminder of the countless ways humans have understood and interacted with the world. So losing linguistic diversity is like losing biodiversity. It narrows our collective potential. Linguistic diversity is strongest in remote and rugged areas like the Amazon, the Himalayas, Papua New Guinea, and other isolated regions. But even these linguistic refuges are under massive pressures from globalization, environmental destruction, and urbanization. The domination of a few global languages isn't new. As far back as 1492, Antonio de Nebrija wrote that language is the companion of empire. Back then it was Castilian Spanish spreading alongside colonization. Well, today we see the same dynamic with English, Chinese, and Spanish. The global reach of media, education, and the internet makes it easier than ever for dominant languages to overshadow smaller ones. Now let's talk about those so-called killer languages. English is the most obvious example, and it's the default language of global business, pop culture, and the internet. It's growing every day with nearly 2 billion people worldwide learning it as a second language. While learning a global language can open doors, it often comes at the expense of smaller languages. Families stop passing down their mother tongue, choosing instead to prioritize the dominant language. This isn't just about losing words, it's about losing gestures, expressions, and entire ways of seeing the world. Now, can endangered languages be saved? Yes, they can, absolutely, but it's not easy. Saving a language means making sure it's spoken, taught, and passed on to future generations. The most critical factor is intergenerational transmission. Even a tiny language can survive for centuries if parents and grandparents keep speaking it to their children. Take Gurgoni, an Aboriginal language in Australia. It's always had just a few dozen speakers, but it thrived for centuries because the community valued and maintained it. Sadly, these kinds of linguistic equilibriums are disappearing as dominant languages take over. But there's hope, guys. Technology is giving us new tools to document and revive endangered languages. Community-driven initiatives, apps, and online learning platforms are helping scattered speakers connect and teach their languages. If you're a monolingual speaker, well, you might wonder, what can I do? So start by learning about the world's languages and challenges they face. Appreciate the privilege of speaking a dominant language and advocate for linguistic diversity whenever you can. We need better policies, more funding, and broader awareness to support endangered languages. But it's also about attitude. Respecting and valuing all languages are as equal is the first step toward creating a world where linguistic diversity can thrive. Now, let's talk about the impact of linguistic privilege and the urgent need to protect endangered languages. Let's break this down in a way that's meaningful, clear, and hopefully eye-opening for all of us. Let's start with the harsh reality. In places like the US and Canada, colonialism has devastated indigenous languages. Genocide, forced relocations, and systematic prejudice wiped out entirely many cultures, and along with them, their languages. Of the 300 languages once spoken north of the Rio Grande, about a half are now extinct. Most of the surviving ones are barely holding on, with fewer than 10 native speakers left in many cases. So languages like Cherokee and Navajo have a slightly better chance of surviving into the coming decades, but even they face the challenges. It's a similar story in Australia, where hundreds of Aboriginal languages have either disappeared or are spoken by just a handful of elderly speakers. Here's where things get even more complicated. Many people believe the world would be simpler if we all spoke one dominant language, say English. But let's unpack that idea for a second. History shows us that speaking a common language doesn't really necessarily unite people. Just look at the divisions and conflicts that exist even in countries where one language is dominant, like the US or England. Instead of celebrating differences, a dominant language mindset can lead to hyper-focus on small distinctions, for example, accents and word choice and tone of voice, that divide us even further. Meanwhile, smaller languages are being pushed into smaller and smaller spaces. For many, their use is now confined to private moments at home, and even that is slipping away. Families worldwide are choosing to prioritize dominant languages like English over their mother tongues, not just abandoning words, but also rich traditions of gestures, tone, conversational style, and cultural knowledge. English in particular has become a kind of linguistic empire of our time. Fueled by pop culture, business, and the internet, it's now the most widely learned language on earth. Over 500 million people speak it natively, with another billion or two learning it as a second language. This isn't inherently bad. Learning English opens up opportunities for many people, but it's important to acknowledge the privilege that comes with being a native English speaker. English speakers rarely face situations where their language isn't understood, making it easy to ignore the challenges faced by those who must give up their own language to access those same opportunities. For many dominant language speakers, being monolingual feels normal. It's easy to take for granted that your language is everywhere. Books, movies, schools, business meetings, you name it. A person who speaks the standard dialect of a dominant language is often perceived as more educated, smarter, or more trustworthy, even though this has nothing to do with reality. And yet, so few of us in dominant language communities even ever consider this privilege. Gender, race, and class are increasingly part of our social consciousness, but linguistic privilege, that's still overlooked. If you're a monolingual speaker of a dominant language, what's your role in all of this? Well, first is about awareness, so start by acknowledging that language shapes how we see the world and that every language holds unique value. Second, take the time to learn about other languages. If possible, learn one. Immersing yourself in another language isn't just a skill, it's a way of gaining perspective, of understanding the diversity of human thought and culture. Imagine sitting in a room where a language is spoken that you do not understand. No subtitles, no translations, nothing. Just listen. It might be frustrating, right? But it's also humbling. This experience is a window into what millions of people feel when their language is dismissed or ignored. For linguists, documenting endangered languages is both a race against time and a bittersweet experience. Discovering a language often happens at the moment it's on the verge of disappearing. The very presence of an outsider recording it often signals that other forces, globalization, colonization, are closing in. The movement to preserve languages is relatively new. In 1992, linguist Michael Krauss warned that up to 90% of the world's languages could disappear in the coming century. His call to action inspired a wave of linguists and activists to focus not just on theory, but on recording and preserving endangered languages. So, preserving languages isn't just about keeping records, it's about fighting for the communities who speak them. Languages are tied to identity, history, and cultural pride. When a community loses its language, it often loses its connection to its past. That's why language revival is about more than linguistics, it's about liberation. Indigenous communities are reclaiming their languages as a way to recover from historical trauma and assert their place in the modern world. So where do we go from here? Well, it's clear that preserving linguistic diversity isn't just the responsibility of linguists or endangered language communities. It's something we all need to care about. As dominant language speakers, we can use our privilege to advocate for policies that protect and promote the linguistic diversity that we have. We can amplify the voices of those fighting to keep their languages alive, and we can make an effort to learn from and with these communities rather than speaking over them. Anyway, guys, I hope you liked this episode. And yeah, go ahead and learn a new language, an endangered language. Tell me how it goes in the comments below. Bye bye.